You know, I don't want to date myself here, but I remember actually 20-something years ago now being part of Y2K.
Yeah.
And we were trying to figure out what was going to happen on New Year's Eve, and everyone was freaked out about whether or not there would be this big computer outage and technological issues that would go when the year flipped from 99 to 2000. But that was, sort of a real fear in a lot of ways, and yet it never materialized. If you had told me at the beginning of 2020, we're going to have a global pandemic that will impact the entire world, our livelihood, how we go to school, how we interact, we'll all be wearing masks, and it's going to play a big role in a presidential election, I would have just laughed. This is the kind of stuff that people write fiction, novels or movies about.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to a friend recently about that. If someone told me last year that we would all be wearing masks, I literally would have laughed and said, that's impossible. And again, that's where we're at for a while longer, likely as well. But Sean, it wasn't only the vaccine. I mean, things just continued to get worse. Every month, it seemed like it was something else. And in May, we saw the death of George Floyd, which was so unfortunate and a terrible murder that we witnessed. And obviously brought about Black Lives Matter and all this social unrest on top of the global pandemic that we were in the midst of as well.
It's amazing that one person changed the trajectory of this country. I mean, it really is amazing to stop and think about that for a moment, but the impact it had. There's no question in my mind that it played a big role in the election in terms of turnout and issues that were discussed, and it really changed, I think, especially the left. When you look at how the left was dealt with, or how the left dealt with this, it reshaped the left in so many different ways, and it sort of spawned a wave of cancel culture and changes to our society that, again, the same thing, I don't know that I ever could have said that someone could have predicted at the 2020, the way that it happened. And we're still seeing this. It's almost like the Me Too movement in a way where a big incident finally boils to the top and breaks. And suddenly it's changing things in a way that you would have never predicted prior to the incident that really did that. And I honestly wonder what this year would have been like. But I will tell you, both in terms of the #1 and the #2 story, there's no question that the election really would have probably been a lot different in a lot of different ways. And we don't probably have enough time to go into it. But if either of those 1 or 2 instances hadn't occurred, either the pandemic hadn't come here or George Floyd hadn't been killed, then none of this, I think we would have had a very different outcome on the election. And this is something that probably political science classes will weigh forever. But obviously, I think the big third story, as I just mentioned, is the election. I mean, if you think about it on so many fronts, and we've covered it, Lyndsay, on the show. You mentioned, we've talked about the women that we've had on the show, and they're a remarkable group of people that is going into the 117th Congress, that are from all sorts of backgrounds, that are from districts, far and wide in different parts of this country. So many of them were told that they couldn't win, and yet they won. You look at the state level stuff that we've talked to Adam Kincaid about on a couple occasions, and the impact, like the media got this so wrong again.
Yes, they absolutely did. We've talked on our show about this big blue wave that didn't happen. And I think, to your point, we will have political scientists looking back at this election, at this year, for decades to break it apart and understand what it could have looked like. Obviously, we will never ultimately know, and you can't change the outcome. But it is interesting to see the things that ultimately marked and changed our society in different ways. And probably, ultimately, the outcome of this election. And I think the unrest, not the only social unrest, but the unrest from all these businesses that had lost their jobs, people losing their businesses, also brought a weight to this. The deaths of many people and COVID, just brought a newness to this election that no one could predict. And, something else that's interesting is we had a candidate who pretty much campaigned from their basement and virtually. We've never seen that before. So it completely changed, the ground game that we normally see. And that's something that Trump really pulled into play more. We saw Hillary Clinton had a great ground game in 2016. Trump took something from Obama's playbook this election cycle, but ultimately it was somebody who campaigned from their basement that was still able to get millions of people out to vote. To me, that is shocking.
Well, but again, I keep going back to this, but if you look at President Trump got the highest vote of non-white since 1960. His ground game was spectacular. The way that he grew the party, it just so cut against the media narrative. The same way in 2016 that they got it epically wrong and were unapologetic about how wrong they were. They got it wrong again on so many levels with respect to what the president did, how his campaign worked, the amount of votes that he got, the amount of votes that Congress got. The House was supposed to get epically worse for the Republicans. They almost took the majority back. They were going to lose the Senate. They only ended up losing one incumbent. They picked up seats. This was a big deal in terms of how the Republicans did. And you know, I would have thought after 2016, the media would have really done some serious soul searching, which they claimed they were going to do, and they didn't. But to see two elections where you get it this wrong, this poorly, really shows people that as we head forward into these next election cycles, remember that the same people who have continued to get it wrong over and over again are going to try to tell us heading into the next the next midterm elections why suddenly they're right again.
Yeah, I think you're right. And to your point, the media showed us that they're out of touch with the American people, because polling showed us that as well. You know, everyone said it was going to be a landslide. It wasn't a landslide. It was within polling margins, very close. And I think that our country is more divided than anyone could ever imagine at this point.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.